So welcome to our next pandemic lessons session. This is our second in a series of, we're not sure how many, because we invite you to let us know if you've got an idea of something you want to share. But the idea behind this series is to capture some of the learning that we have done over this extraordinary couple of years and counting, as we have needed to move our teaching and learning to fully remote contexts, as we have transitioned back or not, or now we're really not sure, as we deal with the uncertainty, as we deal with extraordinary social, political circumstances, and just a lot of existential angst. We have struggled and we have suffered and we have persevered, but we have also learned so much. So the idea behind this series is to highlight, some educators who feel like, you know what, I came up with something that I actually like even better than what I did before. Let's not lose those lessons. Let's hang on to those lessons. So we are privileged to have Lauren Servais from Santa Rosa Junior College sharing with us today some of the ways that she went about building community in a fully online asynchronous context. And so I just want to let you know that Lauren is going to present for 20 minutes or so about her pandemic lessons. You will have the opportunity to go into a breakout room and chat with colleagues about what you have noticed, what you've heard, what's resonating with you, questions that you have, ideas that you're having, stuff you're just going to borrow. And then we'll come back at the very end for just a brief whole group debrief. So just know that you're going to have that chance to talk with colleagues. And I forgot to mention that, this is something where we're specifically, everybody who's presenting their pandemic lessons, we're specifically thinking about, as reading apprenticeship practitioners at the college level, this is work that we are trying to do face-to-face or online or in whatever context. And so that's kind of like part of the shared understanding behind this work. So with that, I will hand it over to Lauren with my great thanks. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Nika. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm just so excited to be here with all of you, to be in your company. So this morning I woke up, and I live in Santa Rosa, it's Northern California, and the sun was red. And it's because of all the fires that are raging here in Northern California. And I had a rush of emotions when I stepped outside. And I felt this heaviness in my body, just remembering the many fires, right? The real and the symbolic that have gone through my community that we're all experiencing. And so just for a moment, I'll invite you to just check your internal weather. Some days the sun shines brightly. Some days the sun is red, right? Other days, maybe we're storming. Maybe inside it's glassy ocean waters, right? A nice morning breeze. And the goal of looking in, it's not about judging. It's not about comparing. It's not like one weather is better than the other. It's really just to notice, how are you? And how are you showing up today? And so today I'm really feeling that red sun. And I'm feeling the weight of the moment, right? With all the fires that are going through in our local, national, global communities. And the awe terrifyingness of it all, and just the awe amazingness too. And so that morning sun was also a really good reminder to acknowledge the land and people who sustain me. I live in Santa Rosa, so I honor the Pomo people. And I also give honor to my home land of Hawaii. So my experience with reading apprenticeship has always been this invitation to weave apprenticeship and equity pedagogy. And while always asking that question, for what, right? For what purpose? And there are some forms of apprenticeship that demand conformity, right? We show so that there is a mimicking. And what if instead, though, we leveraged apprenticeship as a means to make power languages, power ways of being transparent, so that students could then make their own language and identity choices. And what if we leverage things like metacognitive conversation to enhance culturally sustaining teaching and learning? And so for me, there has always been this question of how do I establish a just strong foundation where we are anchoring in the personal and the social to invite students to fully engage. And like all of us, right, I found myself in this pandemic really being called to weave knowledge, reflection, and intention into some critical action. How we invite students into community, it matters. If I want students to be in a space where they feel like they can sustain their culture and their identities, then what am I actively doing to make sure that the space that I'm inviting them into is conducive to that? I think that how we invite students into community sets a foundation for success, retention, right? And how we welcome them, how we invite them is also connected to the safety that they might feel, right? And I always use safety and wholeness, and we'll talk a little bit more about these notions of safety, but also in how brave we're asking them to be, to take some learning risks, to step beyond, right, what they are currently able to do into spaces where they can stretch and they can grow. And so I took this moment of physical distancing and remote instruction to really ask, so how do I create and sustain a space in the classroom where we are not socially distanced, right? And so holding that tension of required physical distancing with, can I design for social just interaction? And also, how can I build community and really invite students to be their whole selves in the classroom? And so with all of that, like many of you, right, building knowledge, and there's this swirl of all of these things, and how do I weave them? And for me, it was really this question of how do I create this opening sequence of assignments that weaves in safe and brave space, that weaves in community agreements, builds community, anchors students in social and personal dimensions, and most importantly, invites students into this understanding, this embodiment of what I have learned about culturally sustaining pedagogy. And in the PowerPoint that I've shared, there's a link to this actual reading in the speaker comments if you want to read it. And you know, culturally sustaining practices are building on the culturally relevant pedagogy, right? And one of the big pieces that it asks is, how do we support multilingualism and multiculturalism in the class? So how do we not expect students to just conform, but rather how do we invite them and the wholeness of who they are into learning community? And I have found that culturally sustaining pedagogy really begins with me. And it really begins with, how do I make transparent my responsibility to maintain the dignity and the humanity of all who enter into the classroom? We're different people. We have different experiences. And on top of this, we're also experiencing a collective trauma, right? It's touching all of us in different ways, but we are nonetheless experiencing this pandemic, experiencing the calls for racial reckoning, also experiencing what's going on right now, right? Witnessing what's going on in Afghanistan. And so what I ask students is that we're going to respect the multiple differences that exist in this classroom by creating a space where diverse opinions and perspectives can be shared and examined. We're going to make a commitment to affirm life and act in ways that honor the humanity of all people. And we're going to hold ourselves and each other accountable to this agreement. And, you know, when I first started doing norms, I would get just respect, 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 respect. right? And I quickly found that our definitions of respect vary greatly based on our experiences, based on our positionalities. And if I am going to truly invite students into the wholeness of who they are, right, ask them to be vulnerable, to learn, then it's my responsibility to make sure that there is a minimum safety that is provided in the class. And we can disagree on ideas, and I'm hoping we do disagree, right? True inquiry is about asking questions. It's about wondering about things. But the dignity and respect, people's humanity, that's something that we always need to uphold. And so I asked students that if we are going to engage as community, then we need to be responsible for maintaining this minimum safety requirement for everyone. And then the other piece I remind students about is just the netiquette piece, right? That, you know, in a class, we have the benefit of facial expressions, tone, voice, body language that helps in our conversation. All of those things have been taken away, right? And so, you know, and a lot of us will ask students, turn your Zoom on, so we can see you, and maybe do a video instead of a post. And I think we need to remember, though, that there's a vulnerability that we ask students when we do those things. And so how can we from the start building towards those things? So the second move I make is, you know, I did a whole sabbatical project on wonderment and awe, right? And it's a habit of mind. And what I want for students is I want them to open up to their curiosity, to their appreciation for just the awesomeness of being in learning community, right? This is not something we often get to do. Sometimes students will come with the attitude of, I have to take this class, right? It's one of my requirements. And I think that that mindset sort of invites a certain way of being, right? Of going through the motions. And so, you know, I want students to understand that, like, how do we get back in touch with our toddler selves, right? The toddler self that asked questions and wondered about everything, right? Why is the sky blue? What happens when we flush the toilet? Why do reading and writing and thinking matter, right? Why do I need this English class? And what is it preparing me for? Why do we get to think certain ways of reading and writing are better than the others? Better than others, and who gets to make those decisions, right? What do I think about all of this? And, you know, the other piece too is, like, how can we take a step back and just like revel in that awesomeness of, wow, somebody else made, that was a really great idea, right? I love that statement. Or even just reveling in and appreciating the fact that we're here, right? We came and we made it to this online space, and I'm here to do this work. And even just like the other piece about awe that I love is just that sort of juxtaposition of awe terrifying and awe wonderful, right? They're all those things. And like, yes, there's schema that can be activated when we enter the classroom that is terrifying, right? But there's also pieces of it that we need to recognize that. But how can we start to also open up to some of the wonderfulness, right, that exists? And then the other piece that I'm really trying to do is, again, like really being transparent with students about where I'm coming from. And I've started sharing with them my thoughts on teaching and learning. And the sort of hidden piece that I really love about it too is that it builds in this level of accountability. Because when I tell students where I'm coming from in terms of teaching and learning, they can hold a mirror up to me too, right? To help me see, is there a distance between my theory and my practice, right? And what I'm trying to talk about here is I'm trying to surface, like, what are the things about learning that I love? And I used to not have fun in there. And I thought, oh gosh, how is that a metaphor, right? For learning. And I thought, like, I became an English major because it was fun, right? For me, I made a connection to the storytelling traditions that exist in Hawaii. And I realized, wait, when I read John Milton, right? Or when I read all of these other pieces, they're just telling stories. That's no different, right, than what we do in our own family. And then the other piece too is like sacred space, and how do we cultivate and understand the sacredness of the work that we're doing, but also the sacredness just of each other. And then I also share with students, like, I'm really trying to be a warm demander. So yeah, we're going to have high expectations in this class, but for me, it's also coupled with aloha, right? And I used to not put aloha in it. I used to call it care, then I called it respect, and I called it love. And I thought, but aloha is my word. And like, what does it mean to care for folks? What does it mean to hold this space of honoring and recognizing just the wonderfulness of who we are as human beings? And so, I'm also remembering one of the early Puente sessions that I went to learn about like, what do we do like when we puentify the classroom, was this brilliant presentation by Paula Silva, and she talked about, the title was, they won't care what you know until they know that you care. And that's really sat with me for a really long time. And, you know, this move to mandatory remote, it's how do you convey care through Canvas modules, through assignments, through announcements, right? And so it's really been this question for me of, how do I leverage the technology to convey things that maybe my facial expression would have conveyed in a classroom, right? And so there's all of these things that I feel like I've needed to sort of communicate and really work on grappling with. And so I do all of this, right? And it doesn't take long, right? This is just, I do a couple quick little videos. I ask students to read it, because I really just want them to also get a sense, like, I want them to hear my voice as I'm talking about this. I want them to get a sense for the human that's behind these ideas. And then I've sort of taken our reading apprenticeship, right? Like setting norms, but also really adding to this space of how do we hold in tension safe space and our need for safe space, right? And the minimum requirements that my dignity and my humanity are going to be honored in this room, but also how do we invite students really transparently into brave space? Learning can feel inherently unsafe. There are so many experiences that many of us have, right? Where we might come into a space and feel like, I don't want to ask that question because someone might laugh, or I need to maintain this facade, right? I need to maintain face here. And also sometimes we mistake the discomfort of learning with feeling like I'm not safe, right? And how do we not hide from the conversations that we really need to have? But all of these, again, are things that we need to be working on together. We've got to engage in inquiry. What does it mean for us to hold both a safe and brave space in this classroom? So I asked students to do a little bit of reading, right? And I asked them to just pick two, and then do some reflection. I asked them, what do you need in this class to feel like really safe and invited to be asking questions, sharing ideas, and fulfill that course agreement? And then we post our responses. And I also want to say, you know, I learned tech sets from Nika, right? And how do you give students some choice? The tech sets, the readings are all on similar topics, but they get to pick what they want to read. They get to pick like where their inquiry is going to lead them. And then the other piece I learned from Nika and reading Apprenticeship is, how do we also establish some routines, right? So when I'm doing dialogues or inviting students to have conversation, I follow a very similar routine always. We usually start with some kind of reading, maybe it's a video. It's usually some kind of text set though. I ask them to do some reflection, to share their ideas, and then to read and respond to each other. So what they know when they come to any dialogue or any conversation we're going to have online, we're going to follow the same routine. So they're not having to question those things, right? They just know that this is something we do together. And then sometimes, depending on the conversation, we'll also create a Google Doc, where it'll be a living document. I'll cut and paste a lot of the statements that were brought up in this dialogue, or students will post it there themselves. But then it becomes this living document for us to return to every now and then, right? What are our brave space agreements? Are there spaces we need to amend? Are there spaces we've got questions now? Because the other piece, right, and this is something Nika and I have been really grappling with, is this notion of embodying, right? And, you know, back to that original question of, well, but everybody says respect, and we act it out differently. And so what we're trying to do here is, how do we get really intentional about our brave space community? How do we practice those things? How do we also engage in some metacognition to be thinking about, how did that work, right? When were the spaces that I felt like, wow, that question right there, I don't know why, but it made me feel really brave, right? Or that question was too much. I decided I needed to not address that question. I needed to do something else. But just giving students that invite to be thinking about, how do we embody, right? And as a learner, how do I engage bravely? And so all of this, right, we do before we ever get to an intro. So before I ever invite students to say who they are, right? And me as a new teacher, and even me in face-to-face, we would often early on do these introductions. And, you know, especially with just the world, right? I thought it was, and I think it says something too about the space we're in right now, where even asking students to disclose who they are felt like it was asking a lot. And I needed to make sure that they were coming into a space that was loving, that was going to honor who they are and what they bring, before I asked them, right, to tell us. And so in our introduction, I give students two options, right, to give us a little piece of who they are. And so the first option is they can share their soundtrack. And, you know, most of them know what a soundtrack is, right? But we talk a little bit about, so imagine if there was a movie of your life, what would be the songs that were playing, right, throughout the movie? And so they will, and I will say the beauty of being in, and this is something I've done just in an online class, because students can post the songs. So we can see the YouTubes, we can listen to it, right? And then they give us maybe just a little bit of context, right? So this is a song that would be accompanying me in middle school, right? Or sometimes they'll say, this is me on the soccer field when I was like just learning at 5. Or the other option is to produce an I am from, right? So what are the foods, experience, histories, people, cultures, dreams, right? That make up who you are. And then I also give students, because one of the big pieces that I've really been leaning to, especially in this online class, is that, you know, I'm not really an online student. I got all my degrees face-to-face. And I've been lucky to take, like, I took RA online. So there's been these little moments where I got to experience what it means to be an online student. So I've also really been leaning into doing what I ask students to do, right? And making it public too. And so I share with them my soundtrack, I share with them my I am from, and I give them options, right? If you want to just post links, if you want to use words, if you want to make a video, whatever you want to do, right? Whatever you feel called, they can pick that form and then share. And the piece that I love is, so for every single student, I get to spend some time with them. I listen to their soundtrack. I listen or I read whatever they've done, right? I'll take in their I am from, and they'll do that for each. What we want to do is take a moment, and we're going to invite you to have some conversation, both in small group and whole group. We'll ask you to think about, so what are you wondering, right? What's been awe-inspiring? What's been awe-terrifying? And how do you build community online? And so we'll give you about like 2 minutes, so something really quick. You can draw, you can write, you can think, whatever you feel called to do. Just to be thinking about, like, what are some ideas that you might want to take into a small group to have conversation about how we build community online.